Okay, wow. You guys have really outdone yourselves this time. So many reports, articles, even some handwritten notes on the Indian diagnostic industry. I can tell this is something you're all really interested in.
It's a hot topic for sure.
And for good reason. It's a market that's absolutely booming. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got these massive players like Dr. Path Labs and Metropolis.
Yeah.
But then, at the same time, you've got all these smaller independent labs that are still a big part of the landscape. It's a really interesting mix.
It's fascinating, that's for sure. It's that blend of like the really traditional and the cutting edge all happening at the same time.
And it's not just one big lump
Oh,
either.
yeah.
You have to think about it in terms of two main branches.
Yeah.
You've got the pathology side,
Hmm.
and then you've got radiology,
Yeah.
each with its own complexities and ways that it's growing.
It's a very heterogeneous industry, I would say.
Now, one thing that really jumped out at me from all the stuff you sent over
Yeah.
was that before the pandemic hit, over 70% of the market was dominated by those smaller, often unorganized labs.
Right, right.
So I'm curious, did COVID-19 change that at all?
It's interesting because, in a way you'd think, oh, a pandemic, everybody's going to want to go with the big reliable names. And that definitely happened. You had people looking for reliable results, maybe wanting a brand they recognized, especially when it came to things like accredited labs.
Makes sense.
But here's the thing. While the organized sector grew, the unorganized sector actually grew too.
Oh, really? I would have thought the pressure of the pandemic would have kind of pushed those smaller guys out.
You would think that, right?
Yeah.
But the demand for testing was so high that it actually created more opportunities for those unorganized labs to pop up. The barrier to entry, it's relatively low.
Well,
So you had an influx of new players, particularly in areas where those big organized labs hadn't really reached yet.
so the pandemic, in a way, was like a double-edged sword.
Hmm.
Like it boosted those big players, but it also opened up some space for new entrants.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. What we can gather from these sources is that the overall market share probably hasn't shifted as much as we might think.
Interesting. Okay, so let's unpack those two branches you mentioned. First up, pathology.
Hmm.
What exactly falls under that umbrella?
So think of pathology as the detective work of healthcare.
Well, I like that.
It's all about analyzing samples, whether it's blood, tissue, whatever it is, trying to figure out what's happening inside the body.
Okay.
And within pathology, you've got two main areas: clinical pathology and anatomical pathology.
Okay, so now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. Break those down for me.
All right, so with clinical pathology, think fluids. Your sources mention blood sugar tests, cholesterol checks, even those good old pregnancy tests.
Yeah.
It's all about analyzing those bodily fluids, looking for signs of disease or health conditions.
It's amazing how much information you can get from just a single drop of blood these days.
It really is.
Now, what about anatomical pathology?
That's where things get really up close and personal. We're talking cellular level here. Biopsies, tiny samples of tissue examined under a microscope.
Oh, wow.
That's how they diagnose things like cancer or figure out what's causing an infection.
Got it. So one is about fluids, the other is about tissues,
Exactly.
both trying to solve the mystery of what's happening inside us.
Precisely. And then, of course, there's radiology, which takes a completely different approach.
Right. Radiology, for me, that always conjures up images of x-rays, but it's so much more than that now, right?
It's way beyond just basic x-rays these days. Radiology, it's about using different imaging techniques to get a look inside the body. And while x-rays are still common, there's a whole world of other tools. Take ultrasound, for instance. It uses sound waves to create these real-time images.
Oh, wow. Sound waves.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
often used for things like, monitoring pregnancies.
So sound waves, what other high-tech gadgets are we talking about here?
Well, there's CT scans, which use x-rays to create these super detailed cross-sectional images, really helpful for diagnosing internal injuries, finding tumors, that sort of thing.
Okay. And of course, you can't forget about MRI scans.
Oh yeah, those always sounded so futuristic to me. MRIs, they use magnets and radio waves to make images, and they're particularly good for looking at soft tissues like the brain or spinal cord.
So that's why doctors always seem to order so many different types of scans.
Yeah,
It depends on what they're looking for and which tool will give them the best view.
exactly. Each technique has its strengths, and it's all about choosing the right one for the job.
Now, speaking of different players in all of this,
Mhm.
your sources really emphasize the importance of doctor referrals in the diagnostics world.
Yeah.
Why is that? Like, why do most tests come from a doctor's recommendation?
Well, it all comes down to trust and liability. More than 50% of these tests are ordered by doctors because they're the ones who are ultimately making treatment decisions based on those results.
So there's a lot riding on those results being accurate.
Oh, absolutely. If a doctor bases their treatment plan on a faulty test result, it can have huge consequences. And the liability. It could even put their license at risk.
That's a lot of pressure. So I guess when you're choosing a lab, it's not just about finding the cheapest option.
Not necessarily. If your doctor doesn't trust a particular lab, they might end up ordering a repeat test at one they DO trust, which ends up costing you more in the long run.
That's a good point. So it's about finding that sweet spot between cost and your doctor's confidence in a lab.
Exactly. You need that balance.
Okay, let's talk about those big players we touched on earlier. The diagnostic chains, like your Dr. Lal Path Labs, ThyroCare, Metropolis. What are their advantages and how are they making their mark in this market?
Well, for one thing, they've got brand recognition. In healthcare, people tend to stick with names they know and trust, and these chains have built pretty solid reputations for quality and accuracy.
Yeah, it's like choosing toothpaste or cereal. You go with what feels familiar.
Exactly. Plus, there's the convenience factor. They've got these huge networks of collection centers, so getting a test is as simple as walking into your local branch.
Just like the Starbucks of healthcare.
You could say that. And they've also been really smart about investing in technology. It lets them offer a wider range of tests, process things faster, and even let patients book appointments and see their results online.
Wow, that's a game changer, especially for busy people. No more waiting on hold or dealing with mountains of paperwork.
Yeah.
But what about the cost? Are these bigger chains typically more expensive?
That's where economies of scale come in. Because they're operating at such a large volume, they can negotiate better prices for supplies and equipment.
So ideally, they can pass some of those savings on to the patients.
In theory, yeah. But pricing is always a complicated issue. There are a lot of factors at play.
Right, you can't just compare price tags. You got to think about the lab's reputation, your doctor's trust in their results, the whole package.
Exactly. It's a bigger picture. And it's interesting to see how these chains are expanding, reaching into smaller cities and towns, bringing quality diagnostics to areas that might not have had easy access before.
I bet that's making a huge difference in those regions, especially in terms of healthcare access.
It really is. Each company has its own strategy for expanding. Dr. Lal Path Labs, for example, they're focusing on organic growth, building new labs,
Yeah.
expanding their network. But they're also using acquisitions, like their recent purchase of Suburban Diagnostics.
So they're growing from within A&D, absorbing existing players.
Clever. What about ThyroCare? ThyroCare is also big on acquisitions, but they're also focusing on strategic partnerships, collaborations that let them offer a wider range of services. Like they recently acquired Think Healthcare, which specializes in things like home-based ECG.
Oh, so they're offering those services to their existing customers,
Yeah,
expanding your reach without having to build everything from scratch.
that's right.
So it's like creating this one-stop shop for all your diagnostic needs.
Exactly. And then you have Metropolis. They're all about scalability and profitability. They're using something called an asset-light model, which means they partner with existing labs and offer management and branding support instead of building their own labs everywhere.
So they're basically leveraging their expertise to scale up quickly without that huge capital investment.
It's a very strategic approach, and it allows those smaller labs to benefit from the Metropolis brand and their know-how, potentially growing their own customer base and the services they offer.
A win-win for everyone involved. Now, while we're on the topic of these big players, it's worth noting that they're not just focused on the bottom line.
Right.
Your sources highlight some of the social responsibility and sustainability initiatives that they're involved in, which is really refreshing to see.
Absolutely.
Companies thinking beyond just profit.
Yeah, corporate social responsibility is becoming more and more important across industries, and healthcare is no exception. For example, Dr. Lal Path Labs is really active in public health campaigns, especially in those rural areas, focusing on preventative health care and raising awareness about those non-communicable diseases.
That's awesome. Taking a proactive approach, especially in areas where information might be limited, that's really commendable.
It's about reaching those who need it most. And they're also investing in training programs for phlebotomists, those folks who draw your blood.
Right, right.
Recognizing that you need skilled professionals to make sure those blood draws are accurate and, as painless as possible.
It's all about the patient experience, making people feel comfortable and confident.
Exactly. And they're also collaborating with government healthcare programs, particularly those focused on nutrition for tuberculosis patients.
Oh, wow. So they're working to improve healthcare outcomes for some of the most vulnerable populations.
They're really committed to making a difference. Now, ThyroCare, they're really focused on sustainability.
Oh, that's great.
They've invested in those effluent treatment plants to make sure their labs are handling waste responsibly. And they're also trying to go digital as much as possible. Less paper, less impact.
Smart move. Reducing their carbon footprint. Good for the planet and good for business.
Exactly. And finally, Metropolis, they're all about their employees. They've got these really comprehensive programs for skill development, training, diversity, and inclusion.
They understand that happy, empowered employees mean better service for everyone.
It's a holistic approach to corporate responsibility. It benefits the employees, the patients, and the community as a whole. It's really inspiring to see.
It really is. It's clear that the Indian diagnostic industry is about more than just profits. It's about improving access to healthcare, contributing to a more sustainable future, and making a real difference in people's lives.
I completely agree.
This is all so insightful, but there's still so much more to uncover. Let's dive even deeper into the financial side of things after a quick break. How profitable are these chains, and what strategies are they using for long-term success? Stay tuned. Okay, so we've talked about the who's who in the Indian diagnostic industry. But now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. How profitable are these big diagnostic chains? What's their secret sauce when it comes to financial success?
Well, if you look at the reports you sent, companies like Dr. Lil Path Labs and ThyroCare, they're consistently showing strong profitability. Their margins are healthy, which tells us they've got efficient operations and they're managing their finances well.
That's music to investors' ears. Okay. But what's driving those profits? Is it just a numbers game, more patients, more tests, more money, or is there something else going on?
It's definitely not just about volume. If it were, those smaller, unorganized labs would be raking it in too.
Right, that's what I was thinking. So what are these organized chains doing differently?
One key factor is the focus on specialized and premium tests. Things like genomics, reproductive diagnostics, tests for autoimmune disorders. These are tests that require advanced technology and a higher level of expertise.
Ah, so they're not just doing the basic blood work and x-rays, they're tapping into a more specialized market where they can charge a premium.
Exactly. And then there's the cost management side. Their size allows them to negotiate better prices for supplies and equipment.
Classic economies of scale.
Right. And they're also using technology to streamline their operations. Online booking, automated sample processing, digital reporting, all of these things reduce manual labor and boost efficiency.
So they're using technology to both expand their services and indeed make their operations leaner and meaner.
Precisely. It's a smart strategy.
Okay, so we've got profitability covered. But what about growth? What are these companies doing to ensure they continue to grow and stay ahead of the curve?
Well, one interesting trend is their focus on preventive healthcare and wellness packages.
So it's like they're shifting from reactive healthcare to proactive healthcare.
Exactly. They're realizing that early detection can lead to better outcomes for patients and potentially lower healthcare costs down the line.
It's a win-win. Patients benefit from early intervention, and the companies benefit from a steady stream of recurring revenue.
Precisely. And these wellness packages often include a bundle of tests tailored to specific age groups or health needs. It makes it easier for people to stay on top of their health.
Like subscribing to Good Health. I like it.
Huh.
But we can't talk about the future of healthcare without talking about technology. What role are AI and digital health playing in all of this?
Oh, they're poised to completely revolutionize the industry. AI, for example, can automate tasks like analyzing medical images, identifying patterns in test results, even predicting the likelihood of certain diseases.
Wow, so AI could assist doctors in making faster, more accurate diagnoses.
Exactly. It's like having a super-powered brain working alongside human expertise.
And then you've got digital health platforms connecting patients and healthcare providers remotely.
Right. Teleconsultations, online appointment booking, even remote monitoring of vital signs. It's all becoming more accessible and convenient.
It's amazing to see how technology is breaking down those barriers to healthcare. But I have to ask, are there any downsides to all this automation? Will AI eventually replace human jobs in diagnostics?
It's a valid concern. Some tasks that humans currently do, like data entry or basic image analysis, those might become automated. However, this technology also creates new opportunities. Think about fields like AI development, data analytics, digital health management. We'll need skilled professionals in those areas.
So it's not necessarily about job displacement, but rather job transformation.
Exactly. It's about adapting and learning new skills to stay relevant in the evolving world of healthcare.
It's a reminder that lifelong learning is essential, no matter what field you're in.
I couldn't agree more.
Now, earlier we mentioned this idea of the doctor-patient lab triangle. Can you unpack that concept a bit further?
Sure. It really emphasizes the interconnectedness between these three key players and how much depends on trust and communication.
Okay, walk me through it.
It starts with the patient consulting their doctor. Based on the patient's symptoms and medical history, the doctor recommends certain diagnostic tests. Then, they refer the patient to a lab they trust, a lab known for accuracy and reliability.
Right, and that's where the doctor's referral becomes so important. They're essentially vouching for the lab, giving patients that peace of mind that the results will be accurate.
Exactly. And then, once the lab completes those tests, they send the results back to the doctor, who then has to interpret them and explain them to the patient.
And that's where clear communication is absolutely crucial.
Oh, absolutely. The doctor needs to explain those results in a way the patient understands, and the patient needs to feel comfortable asking questions.
It's a three-way conversation, a partnership really, where each player has a crucial role.
I like that. A partnership. And it's a dynamic system, constantly evolving, influenced by things like technological advancements, changing patient expectations, and even the regulatory landscape.
Speaking of regulations, your reports also talk about the regulatory environment surrounding India's diagnostic industry. I'm curious, how do these regulations affect the way these companies operate? What kind of challenges do they face?
Regulations are a huge factor in shaping the industry. India has all these different regulatory bodies and guidelines that cover everything from quality control and accreditation to pricing and even data privacy.
That makes sense. You want to make sure patient safety and ethical standards are being upheld. But I imagine all those rules and regulations can be a real headache for companies, especially smaller ones.
You're right. Compliance can be complex and costly. It requires investments in infrastructure, technology, trained personnel. For new players, it can be a real barrier to entry.
So it's not just about having a good idea and some startup capital. You need to be ready to navigate a whole regulatory maze.
Exactly. And even for established players, it's an ongoing challenge. Regulations are always changing, so companies have to adapt and invest in staying compliant.
It's like running a race where the finish line keeps moving. So what specific challenges do companies face when it comes to regulations?
One major hurdle is the lack of uniform regulations across the country. Different states might have different guidelines, which creates inconsistencies and makes it hard for companies operating in multiple locations.
That sounds like a logistical nightmare, keeping track of different rules in each state. What other regulatory headaches are there?
Well, the pace of regulatory change is another issue. The healthcare landscape is evolving so rapidly, but the regulations often lag behind. It creates uncertainty and makes it tough for companies to plan for the future.
So they're always playing catch-up, trying to adapt to new rules while still running their businesses.
Exactly. It can delay things like the launch of new tests or expansions into new markets. Compliance is a must before making big moves.
And then there's the issue of pricing, right? Your notes mention some states have put price caps on certain tests to make healthcare more affordable.
Yeah, price caps are definitely a hot topic. On the one hand, they have the potential to make essential tests more accessible, especially for people who are struggling financially. But they can also squeeze profit margins for companies, making it harder for them to invest in new technology or expand services.
It's a tough balancing act between affordability and sustainability.
Absolutely.
Are there any initiatives in place to address these regulatory challenges?
There are efforts underway to streamline things and create a more consistent and predictable environment. Industry associations are advocating for clearer guidelines, standardized procedures, and better communication between regulators and the industry.
That's encouraging to hear. It sounds like they're working towards a system that benefits everyone, patients, and the industry alike.
Yeah,
A system that fosters growth while making sure things are done ethically and responsibly.
exactly. It's a collaborative effort.
So navigating that regulatory landscape is definitely a key factor for success. But it's not the only challenge, right? There's competition, too. We talked about those big players, but what about the smaller, unorganized labs? How do they hold their own in this increasingly sophisticated market?
It's a classic David versus Goliath scenario. But those smaller labs are more resilient than you might think.
Well, we know the unorganized sector still has a significant chunk of the market, so they must be doing something right.
One of their biggest advantages is their local presence and their understanding of their communities.
They're really embedded in those communities, building those relationships over many years.
Exactly. They might not have the scale or the fancy technology of the big chains, but they make up for it with personalized service and a deep understanding of local needs.
It's the human touch that can be hard to replicate on a larger scale.
Right. Plus, they often have more flexibility with pricing. Lower operating costs mean they can adjust their prices to attract cost-conscious customers.
So they're finding their niche and making it work. But I imagine they also face some pretty big challenges. What are some of the hurdles they have to overcome?
Access to capital is a big one. They often lack the financial resources to invest in new technology or expand, which puts them at a disadvantage when it comes to offering a wider range of tests or competing on convenience.
It's the classic small business struggle, needing money to grow, but struggling to get funding without showing significant growth potential.
Exactly. It's a tough cycle. And then attracting and keeping skilled employees, that's another challenge. The big chains can offer those competitive salaries and benefits, which makes it hard for the smaller labs to compete.
So how can these smaller labs overcome these challenges and stay in the game?
Collaboration is key. By joining forces, they can pool their resources, share expertise, and even negotiate better prices for things like supplies and equipment.
The power of collective bargaining.
Exactly. They can also specialize. Instead of trying to be everything to everyone, they can focus on a specific niche, like a particular type of test or a certain patient population.
Becoming the go-to lab for a particular service or community.
Right. This allows them to build a reputation in that area and potentially charge more for their specialized services.
Smart strategy. What about technology? Can smaller labs really keep up with the big guys when it comes to all those advancements?
Well, they might not be able to make the same level of investment as those larger chains, but it's crucial for them to embrace technology however they can. Maybe adopting cloud-based solutions, partnering with technology providers, or even investing in basic automation tools.
It's about working smarter, not necessarily harder.
Exactly. And it's important to remember the unorganized sector is diverse. There are some really innovative and entrepreneurial labs out there finding ways to adapt and thrive despite the challenges.
It's inspiring to see that kind of resourcefulness.
It really is. They play a vital role in India's healthcare ecosystem, providing essential services and contributing to a more diverse and accessible healthcare landscape.
Their contributions are so valuable. Now let's shift gears and talk about the investor perspective. What do investors look for when they're evaluating diagnostic companies? What are the risks and opportunities in this sector?
Well, the Indian diagnostic industry has attracted a lot of investor attention in recent years. A lot of that is driven by the sector's strong growth potential and the increasing demand for healthcare services.
Makes sense. People are more health conscious these days, and that means a growing market for diagnostic services.
You got it. Investors are always looking for industries with promising growth prospects. But just like any investment, there are risks and opportunities to consider.
So let's break it down. What are the opportunities that make this sector so attractive?
Well, first and foremost, the sheer size and potential of the Indian market is a huge draw. India's population is enormous and growing, incomes are rising, and people are becoming more aware of their health. It all points towards continued growth and demand for diagnostic services.
It's the classic right place, right time scenario for investors. What else is driving their interest?
The growth of health insurance is another major factor. As more people have access to health insurance, they're more likely to afford those diagnostic tests. That leads to higher volumes and revenue for these companies.
So health insurance is acting like a catalyst for market growth.
Exactly. And as we mentioned earlier, the shift towards preventive healthcare and wellness packages is another big opportunity. People are more proactive about their health, opting for regular checkups, which creates a recurring revenue stream for these companies.
It's not just about reacting to illness anymore. It's about staying ahead of potential health issues.
Precisely. But investors aren't just looking at market trends, they're also scrutinizing the financial performance and management of individual companies.
They want to see evidence of profitability, efficiency, a solid track record of growth.
Right. They're looking at things like revenue growth, profit margins, return on equity, debt levels. They want to invest in companies that are financially sound and can generate consistent returns.
So it's a combination of market analysis and company-specific due diligence. What about the risks? What makes investors wary?
Well, the regulatory environment, which we talked about earlier, is a big concern. That lack of uniform regulations and the possibility of sudden policy changes, it creates uncertainty.
The unpredictable nature of the regulatory landscape makes them nervous.
Exactly. Competition is another major risk. The industry is incredibly competitive, both organized and unorganized players battling for market share, which can lead to price wars and pressure on profit margins.
So investors have to assess how well a company can differentiate itself and withstand those competitive pressures.
Right. And then there's the potential impact of technological disruption. As AI and digital health platforms become more sophisticated, they could disrupt those traditional diagnostic models.
It's that constant pressure to adapt or be left behind.
Precisely. Investors want to see companies that are embracing those technological advancements, positioning themselves for the future.
So it's a complex equation for investors, balancing that growth potential with regulatory risks, competition, and the threat of technological disruption. What advice would you give to someone thinking about investing in this industry?
My advice is do your research. Thoroughly research the market trends, the regulations, and the competition. And most importantly, carefully evaluate the management, the financial performance, and the technological readiness of any company before investing.
It's about being informed, not just jumping on the bandwagon.
Exactly.
This has been an incredibly insightful look at the Indian diagnostic industry. We've covered everything from the science behind the tests to the business strategies of the big players. But there's one more crucial aspect we need to explore: the future of this industry. How will technology, changing patient expectations, and evolving regulations shape the landscape in the years to come? That's what we'll dive into after a quick break. Stay tuned. Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground. The science, the business, the regulations, even the investor perspective.
Yep.
But what's really got me thinking is what's next for Indian diagnostics? I mean, we're on the cusp of this huge technological revolution in healthcare, right?
Absolutely. It's an exciting time to be in this field. And you're right, technology is at the heart of a lot of these changes.
Uh-huh.
One of the biggest game changers is artificial intelligence, AI.
AI, yeah.
Your sources talk about how it's being used to analyze medical images, to find patterns in test results,
Oh, wow.
even to predict the likelihood of certain diseases.
So it's like having this incredibly powerful tool working alongside doctors, helping them make faster and more accurate diagnoses.
Exactly. It's like having a second set of eyes, but with superhuman accuracy.
So what are some real-world examples of how AI is being used in diagnostics right now?
Well, take radiology, for instance. AI algorithms are being trained to spot abnormalities in X-rays, CT scans, MRIs. They can flag things like potential tumors, fractures, anomalies that a human eye might miss.
Wow. So it's not just about detection, it's also about prognosis, about creating more personalized treatment plans.
Precisely. AI can analyze massive amounts of data, patient history, genetic information, even lifestyle factors. It can help develop those personalized treatment plans and even predict the likelihood of success.
It's like having a customized healthcare roadmap, tailored just for you.
That's a great way to put it. And the applications go beyond just diagnosis and treatment. AI can streamline lab operations, automate those administrative tasks, boost efficiency overall.
So AI is really impacting every part of the process, from the lab to the doctor's office. That's amazing. What other exciting things are on the horizon?
Well, we can't forget about the rise of digital health platforms.
Oh, right, those apps and websites that connect patients with healthcare providers remotely.
Exactly. Teleconsultations, online appointment booking, it's all making healthcare much more accessible, especially for people in remote areas. And as these platforms evolve, they're incorporating more sophisticated diagnostic tools.
Oh, really?
So patients can potentially do some tests at home and share results with their doctors without ever setting foot in a clinic.
Wow, so instead of going to a lab, you could check your blood sugar or cholesterol from home. That's incredible.
That's the direction things are heading. But we have to be mindful of the challenges. Ensuring those home tests are accurate, reliable, and that data privacy and security are top-notch.
Right, we don't want to sacrifice quality or security for convenience. What other trends are we seeing in the world of diagnostics?
The growing focus on personalized medicine is another big one.
That's all about tailoring treatments based on an individual's genetic makeup and lifestyle.
Exactly. The advances in genomics and molecular diagnostics, they're allowing us to pinpoint specific genetic mutations or biomarkers, the things that predict a person's risk for certain diseases or help guide treatment.
It's like having this personalized blueprint of your health. based on your own unique biology.
Great analogy. And it's leading to the development of incredibly targeted therapies, far more effective, with fewer side effects.
It's truly the future of medicine, moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach. It's
Hmm.
pretty remarkable.
It really is. And it's fueling the creation of new diagnostic tests all the time. Earlier detection, more accurate diagnoses, better treatments. It's a very dynamic field.
This is a really revolutionary time for healthcare.
Hmm.
But I'm sure all this rapid progress comes with its share of challenges.
Yeah.
How is the industry keeping up? What hurdles are they facing?
One of the biggest challenges is simply keeping pace with innovation.
Mm-hmm.
New technologies are popping up all the time, and it can be tough for companies to invest in the latest equipment, train their staff, all of that.
It's like trying to hit a moving target.
Exactly. And then there's the challenge of data,
Oh, yeah.
integrating it all and making sure systems can talk to each other. With electronic health records, lab results, data from wearables,
It's a lot.
it's a lot to manage.
Hmm.
So developing systems that can seamlessly integrate and analyze all that information is critical.
It's like trying to put together this massive puzzle with pieces coming from all over the place.
Perfect analogy. It requires collaboration, healthcare providers, tech companies, policymakers, everyone working together to develop those standardized data formats and systems.
So it's not just a tech challenge, it's a collaborative one. What other challenges are out there?
While ongoing education and training for healthcare professionals is huge, as new technologies and tests become available, doctors and nurses need to stay updated to make the best decisions for their patients.
Lifelong learning is so important in medicine, maybe even more so now than ever before.
Absolutely. And finally, we can't ignore affordability and access. All these amazing advancements, we have to make sure they're available to everyone, regardless of their income or where they live.
Right, we can't let these advancements create a bigger gap in healthcare.
Exactly. We need a multifaceted approach. Government policies, innovative funding models, partnerships, all working together to bridge that gap.
So as we wrap up this incredible deep dive, what are your key takeaways for our listeners? What should they keep in mind as they make their own healthcare decisions?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that the Indian diagnostic industry is at this really pivotal point. It's full of innovation, driven by technology, growing demand, and a focus on prevention. But it's also facing some complex challenges, like those regulatory inconsistencies, competitive pressures, and the need for ethical practices and equitable access.
It's a complex landscape, but one with incredible potential.
Absolutely. My advice to your listeners is to stay informed and be proactive. Stay curious about new developments, talk to your doctors about testing options, and don't hesitate to get a second opinion.
Knowledge is power. Empowering patients to advocate for their own health is so important.
I couldn't agree more. And remember, your health is your most valuable asset, so invest in it wisely.
That's a fantastic point to end on. Thank you so much for guiding us through this fascinating deep dive into the Indian diagnostic industry. It's been a truly illuminating journey, and I know our listeners have learned a lot about this dynamic and evolving field. And to all of you listening out there, we hope this episode has empowered you to make informed decisions about your health and stay on top of all the latest advancements. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay well.